Hi everyone, bonjour à toutes et à tous à nouveau. Donc nous entamons maintenant la série.
So, hello everyone again. We're going to now move to the workshops. We're in the plenary session in La Défense, so all of the online speakers are connected. There is French-English translation, and participants can talk in their chosen language. I'm sure that everyone speaks French very well. So that's probably the language we're going to use for this roundtable discussion. I'm going to hand the floor now to Jérôme, and I'd like to thank him for moderating. Thank you, Luc, and hello to everyone, and those of you who are in this amphitheatre and online. Through this roundtable discussion today, we're going to talk about something that's very much in the news, hybrid work. 5 speakers have kindly accepted to come here and talk about their experience and feedback on this topic. We have Marie-Béatrice, Vignau-Loustau from Société Générale. She is in charge of talent development and supervising all of the human resources and support functions of the group. Then we have Sébastien Crozier, who is CFCCG president of the Orange Group. Fernanda Alonso-Gautrais, head of human resources for OpenClassrooms. It's a fully growing company, and she works on hybrid work, and we'll look at this. Laurent, Geoffroy, Human Resources Director from KPMG France, and they are welcoming us here today. And Caroline Levent, Corporation Manager at Harmonie Mutuelle. I work for Aneo. I'm Monsieur Labastie, and I'm delighted to moderate this roundtable discussion. We're very interested, and we follow the management and organization innovations quite closely. We carry out projects and carry out prospective work for our customers, and this in partnership with NextGen Enterprise and Holy Spirit, among others. And we have set up a barometer on management innovation. It's a quarterly barometer. And the first version was about this topic of working flexibility and hybrid work. It's a document that is online and can be downloaded. And it's very interesting, and it reveals the trends in terms of hybrid work and innovation at work. Now, hybrid work, what does it actually mean? Before we move on to the topic with our guests, let's say what it is. Well, it's carrying out your work in the company offices, but also in places that are the home of the colleagues or third-party areas, such as co-working areas. Now, it's not very new, of course. Many companies, of course, have been having this type, have had this type of work organization for years. With the health crisis, this movement developed substantially, and what the barometer actually measures is that 83% of workers today feel that hybrid work is the optimum way of working. We work talking about workers who can work remotely. A whole lot of activities are not possible remotely, and of all of those who can benefit from remote working, it's a privileged reality, and it will be something that will happen for a long time. It's a new way of working, this hybrid way of working. Through this roundtable discussion, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about various different topics. First of all, we'll try to understand the real nature of remote working within the situation of the people here. And then we'll look at the different impacts in more depth that can be generated by hybrid work in the various organizations. We'll look at the impact on the way the work environment functions, on management practices. We'll look at the impact on the workspaces as well themselves. And then to finish off with an openness on the world, we'll look at questions that haven't yet got a proper answer. We don't have enough background information for this, and this is the potential impact of hybrid work on inequalities. And there's also the question of performance. Can hybrid work lead to sustainable performance? Now let's move to the core of the subject, the core subject with our speakers. I'll set a first question, maybe, about practices of working remotely in your various work environments, and to what extent these have changed over the past few months due to COVID. Caroline, would you like to start? I'm going to open the way, paved the way. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Now, 3 minutes. Harmonie was a company that had been carrying out hybrid working since 2016, same as many other companies. It was quite an offensive project, actually. We set it up immediately with 2 days minimum per week, with this requirement to start with the back office, the work call centres, all of the jobs that were not teleworking in the services sector, that's not an industrial, necessarily an industrial sector. So we had also certain specificities. We're spread around. There are 250 agencies, 60 administrative sites, a great deal of management culture, and very distributed organization from a geographical and management responsibility point of view. And so the crisis was a fantastic accelerating force behind this, if you want to look at it from a positive angle. And the tip over to the full remote teleworking was quite easy, actually, and smooth to put in place. And what we really did to reaffirm this intuition that is mentioned quite substantially in the barometer is that since June we sent out a form. In June we sent out a form to all employees to see how they were doing, to check how their levels of energy were, whether they were good, whether they trusted the system. And we knew that if we didn't do this straight away, if we didn't work with them straight away, and we didn't listen to them, then we'd come back to situations where people were working in situations that were not necessarily optimum. So we asked them these questions, see if they were doing well, whether they had the right level of energy, and 73% said we want to carry on with 3 days at home, working from home, change the way you do your meetings. We don't want more jobs in the various regions and territories outside of the city. And so we started a thought process with what we call co-development models, with strategic systems to think about the work of the future and what we wanted to develop as a culture within Harmonie Mutual. And we identified 9 building blocks: customer relation, and right down to the relationships that we have with the customers, with the clients. Laurent, thank you, Caroline. Okay, Laurent, I'm going to take over from Caroline, and I'm going to add to what you've just said, actually, because we also have made the most of the crisis, or benefited from it. We were in a situation where we had teleworking in place, but it wasn't that developed as it might have been in your company, Caroline. We had a command and control culture. The crisis acted as a catalyst, an accelerator, and we learned from what we did. We learned that employees ended up at home from one day to the next, and that teams could work in an autonomous way and self-sufficiently. And there was this awareness that, and we became aware of the fact that this could work. And I remember talking to employees or colleagues who weren't necessarily in favour of it, and actually were taken in by it and taken over by it. And we did a lot of surveys and a survey with the employees to see what the employees actually wanted. And we also had open fora to validate certain, major principles, and we developed our policy on these bases. We developed all sorts of different usages, and so people are free to work where they want to work from home, from the office, from a co-working space. We give value to working from the office because we, of course, encourage working with others, and then we define 2 minimum days of presence minimum at the office, and we wanted to really communicate on a smaller number of days at work than on teleworking, rather than in order to leave flexibility to the teams. And we gave the freedom to the teams to define themselves what the rules of the game would be by defining key moments. And these key moments when you need to be there, when you need to be creative and work as a team and prepare bids or calls for tender or individual or the interviews, the yearly appraisals, and then the rest is free. The employee can come to the office if they wish to, because there are also different situations depending on where people are based, or they could just stay and work from home. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you for inviting me. I think that the subject is really interesting, and you can see I have many, many beliefs about this, topic. Open Classroom is a digital school. We train people who will be then employed later. Upscaling, rescaling, and digital aspects were part of our DNA. It was easy to move into a full remote teleworking system. As my colleagues just said, the crisis accelerated this process. It meant that we were able to put in place and push slightly further the teleworking, but in a situation that was fully different from the other colleagues, because Open Classroom is a Skylab. Just to give you an idea, there were approximately 230 people by the end of 2020, and now there are over 500 people, soon 600. And the major question is, well, we did have a strong culture of teleworking, information shared, flexibility, but how can we keep this strong culture going with as many new employees and colleagues? The challenge was substantial in terms of communicating. We communicate on a permanent basis, maybe too much, maybe not enough, well, never enough. But we set up very strong moments and we strengthened these moments. So it's very important for us to have links with the colleagues, and we do have weekly meetings with all employees. We have quarterly events and a huge amount of flexibility in how we manage our work. And as Human Resources Director, CHRO of Open Classrooms, it was a huge opportunity to go and find talent. And I think that this really freed up a very interesting market to go and find people who are super trained, competent, and who are not in Paris necessarily or Paris region. So international expansion was really boosted very much by teleworking. Thank you, Fernanda. Sébastien, within Orange, what are the different practices in place? A few contextual elements. Within Orange, we have 3 different activities. Some activities cannot be done remotely, and thankfully few. I don't know how we would have set up fiber optics without going to work on site. Teleworking was a subject of great concern for people who are working. Opening of stores as well was, you can't do everything remotely, so that was important. Now that's a first activity. No teleworking for them. The second activity in the company, and has been around since over the past 15 years, is that colleagues that do have mobility can be teleworking from home, occasionally or permanently. That's been around for 15 years. It's no major issue. There was no major problem to move to full teleworking. And then a third aspect was private issue. Teleworking was carried out from in areas such as, for example, call centers, and they were previously virtual, and then they moved to a teleworking system. Now, just to give you an idea of what we had to deal with, in a few days, the company deployed 50,000 teleworking positions, so you can understand what this means. We had part of the positions that had already been deployed, but we delivered working positions to enable our virtual centers to work, and our network held strong. It was tough and intense, but it held strong, and we drew a great deal of lessons from this. And we will talk about this again throughout the day. This experiment was very enriching, and the result is quite mixed for forced teleworking for all employees. Quite a whole part of the population cannot telework from home because they don't have the equipment or the comfortable living conditions that enable them to do this. This is something we could talk about later, but when you have to answer the phone and you live in a small flat and with children, and you need to answer the phone, and you have these sort of family constraints, then it's difficult. So these difficulties popped up, and then there were other areas that we weren't expecting and that ended up being problematic. The environment is very different. We're still learning from it. Management practices will probably carry on developing and evolving over time. And there'll probably be there's much more thought given to the desire that staff has to work remotely. Then there's a link. There are subjects to do with teleworking and how far they are from work, and all sorts of different issues that can be talked about as well. Now, thank you very much. What about Béatrice? Société Générale, we already had a way of working, teleworking, in our company. Teleworking had already been in place for 10 years or so, and there was a structure, a system. The allowed practice was 2 teleworking days, 2 days per week, but actually in reality it was just 1 day. And it wasn't really that widespread in the different areas of activity at headquarters. We learned a great deal from the crisis, and now we are in a teleworking system that's developed substantially. We did a lot of surveying during the crisis, or polling. We checked by survey what was going on with our employees and colleagues. And some of these polls were whether the employees wanted to carry on this teleworking structure. This was a way of, getting to understand what they wanted. And then following and in the third quarter of 2020, we did a whole work program with a white paper that was produced at the end of it, and we listened to employees on how they felt they needed more flexibility, or how they needed to have hybrid work, and how they needed to have different management practices. So we used all of this. It was a program that was carried out worldwide. And then we used the results to talk with management about teleworking. And then teleworking was set up in a long-lasting way, but not within in the crisis context. So we have approximately 2 to 2.5 days of teleworking per week following this whole program. And it's deployed all over the place, apart from within the network. That's the network open to the customers where people have to be. We have proof of concepts that are carried out there on specific groups of people. Teleworking, of course, will be adapted to the activity that the colleague is carrying out. And then we have structures within teleworking that do put most of their employees on teleworking and teleworking structures, such as Boursorama, for example. So some of the colleagues work full-time on a teleworking system. So we have a framed or a structured practice with flexibility, and it's become more general. That is a mirror effect to the learnings we got from the barometer. It showed that the balance in terms of the quantity of teleworking carried out is between 2 to 3 days following the crisis, which is probably the case in most of your companies. And then there are a few pioneering companies, well, not pioneering, but they go further than this, but it's quite... not that many companies allow their employees to be on 4 or 5 days of teleworking. On the whole, that sort of company is not the most common. Now, let's ask some more questions about hybrid work. How do we keep the ways of functioning, of operating? How does the collective or communal aspect go? And how do we keep the culture within the company when you have a lot of people on teleworking structures? Now, what is the framework for the company when a lot of studies show that the changes and expectations of our employees and colleagues are changing, and they're going towards more flexibility, more autonomy in choice of time and place of work. And some employees are thinking, especially in major cities, to move and go to the regions and keep their job and make the most of hybrid work to be able to work remotely. So that's something that leads to many questions for companies. So in your different companies, is this something that you have noted? You were talking earlier on about surveys carried out with the employees. Have you noted a change maybe in the expectations and aspirations of employees or colleagues, and how have you responded to these changes? Thank you. Laurent, would you like to answer for KPMG? You were talking about polls.
Yes, I think it's very interesting to go from polls because it helps us be more aware of the situation. I think we've more or less done the same thing during the crisis. We make the most of this acceleration during the crisis, and we have a few figures to share. One of these figures actually comes from your barometer. 25% of our employees think that they might change companies if the company is not flexible enough. So that means that even if people tell us that they like to choose, and if they want to come onto the office or not, because they might live with their family, with roommates, well, if they are forced to work from home or come to the office, then they might not be so happy. It might mean that in the future we'll have to optimize the square meters of our offices, rethink our offices, but for now the most important thing is to be flexible for our employees and to give them the choice. And we had another survey by Ares Interactive that's very interesting in my opinion, saying that almost 50% of the respondents, people from universities, engineers, saying that they would change their choice criteria when choosing their employer. And the main criteria now for 40% would be to work on projects that are high-stake project with a human aspect. That's definitely what we're talking about today in NextGen. So a purpose-driven society, that's 37%. And then also creativity of the company, 64%, flexibility and working condition, also main priority, work atmosphere, 53%, and management quality is also a main priority. And 97% of respondents said that companies should mention their strategy around telework to their employees and to their future employees so that they can choose rightly. And that's indeed the first question we are asked by candidates who seek to work with us, is how we arrange, how we organize telework. And I think it's a real challenge for sure, but that's also an attractiveness factor and a way to attract more young employees. Do you have the same conclusion, Marie-Béatrice? Yes, employees would like to have the choice between teleworking and coming to the office, and they would maybe like to go on, work from home on a Monday and on a Friday, for example. At the same time, employees are part of a collective, and so what we try to do in my company is to find the balance, find the common ground between the need of the employees and the need to have a collective within the company. There's, of course, another dimension, which is the need to deal with our office space. And so employees want clear rules, but they want still to have some flexibilities, as Laurent said. And the need to be driven by some purpose. You need to explain why your strategy is as it is. Why do we have an all day in? Why do we want them to come into the office? Why can they go to the work from home? They need transparency, and we need to give meaning to what they do. And that's very important, and not just for the young generation, for everyone. We need everyone to be treated fairly and in an equitable way, and I think that's important for every employee. Sébastien, comments? I'd like to go back on something. We talked about surveys a lot, and I want to give you two lessons we've drawn from our experience. Some of these surveys cannot be accounted for, cannot be seen as completely viable because they are filled in during a difficult time where people are put under pressure. The feeling, of course, around teleworking is not the same during the crisis than before. So if we ask you, do you want to come into the office, and you know that you have to take the train to come to the office or the public transportation, and you're afraid of, becoming ill or being contaminated by someone, then your answer will be no, I don't want to come into the office. So I just want us to be careful about these surveys, and I think that we should ask these questions again once the crisis is over. In our company, we've seen that when people ask for teleworking, there are two factors in mind that are taken into account: how far from their office our employees live. And some companies have moved from La Défense quarter to neighborhood to go to closer to their employees. And the second factor is how nice the work environment is. We had discussions about open space, about flexible desks. And of course, when you work in an open space in a context of pandemic, then no one wants to come because you have no walls to protect you from the others. And, if someone sneezes in the open space, then it's panic everywhere and everyone flees. So I think these two factors are crucial. So let's take some time to carry out these surveys again, because I think right now we are all biased because of the environment and the situation, which does not mean that we shouldn't think about the situation and we shouldn't do these surveys. It's not that. But I think that the situation shows that we need to forget about our mentality where people come to the third sector factories, so to say. So they come in, they plug in their laptop, they work, and then they go home. I think this logic is over. We need to be more flexible. We need a new vision. We can, of course, diminish the time spent at the office, in the office, but we cannot diminish the time of social interactions with your colleagues and managers. Of course, then employers have a role to play, and the employer needs to give tools to their employees to work. And within these tools, we find the office, the desk. And we have many employees who are not able to work from home because they don't have the materials. They don't have a proper desk. They don't have an office room. Some people have to watch their kids. They don't have, they have to work from the kitchen or from the bedroom. And so they can't work properly. And for them, being out, going to the office, and breaking from their family home is the solution. So employers have to be careful. Not everyone wants to work from home. We also have to stay mindful of the people who like to come to the office and who need to come to the office. And that's why the pandemic has been so interesting, because we had lockdowns and people were forced to telework. And when people are forced, it's not their first choice. So again, I'm not sure that the debate around teleworking can be quite neutral when we're still in the crisis. And unfortunately, it looks like the crisis is going to continue for a while. So let's also be mindful about the social time at the office. It is linked to performance, to people liking their work and liking what they do. So we can't really do without the social interactions and the quality of the offices as well, of their sites. I think that the pandemic is also really completely changing our geographical organization, how cities are organized. People don't want to take public transportation for hours anymore. So all this is going to be redefined in the future, defined anew. And I'm not sure that if teleworking is possible, employees will agree to spend hours in the metro to go to work. So I think this is all linked. These issues are all linked with each other. You talked about social interaction and keeping time for social interaction. I'd be interested in hearing the point of view of OpenClassrooms, where the teams are all working from different places. How do you keep to manage this team spirit, this belonging to the company? Well, at OpenClassrooms, every employee can decide how many days of telework they do. It might be 1 day per week or 5 days a week. It's up to them. And some of our employees come to the office often. We have 3 main offices, one in Paris, one in London, and one in New York. And we also started to open new offices in some regions. We have co-working spaces, and it's true what's been said, the geography, it's changing. So our employee is very flexible, he has a lot of choice. And how do we keep the social link? Well, we have 4 types of tools. We have sort of a water cooler conversation that you normally have when you take your coffee break. To replace that, we've used Slack, and we've created a dedicated channel for gossips and water cooler conversations. And it doesn't have to be with someone within your team; it's with anyone from the company, just like if you met someone at random at work. And we create also team building exercises, conventions on sites, and we have a yearly event for our teams, and we're really, really mindful and really take care of our teams that way. Jérôme, the second impact of hybrid work is the impact on management and on managerial modes and practices. Hybrid work makes managing a team more difficult. You have to manage people from the far. You have to moderate meeting from the far online. You have to make sure that you're still in tune with the employees. You have to detect if employees are feeling bad without seeing them. So I think face-to-face, it's not always easy to be a manager, but I feel that it's even complexer and more difficult online. I think at Harmonie Mutuelle, you've tackled this issue. Caroline, would you like to tell us more about it? I'd like to go over what's been said first. I think the barometer and how to measure trust and joy and involvement is really important. But it's true that we're still in a crisis and that we will need more measures later. And we've done that at Harmonie Mutuelle last week. And it's really from our culture to survey our employees. As for management in a hybrid environment, we have to think about work location. And I think that we need to see the bigger picture, and that's how we've done things at Harmonie Mutuelle. First tells us that they need social relationships with their colleagues, but I think you can create social link without, or rather outside your own team. If you talk to employees, you realize, if you talk to them about exploitation, efficiency, operational efficiency, it's not always easy to get an answer, by the way. We realize when we ask these questions that there is sort of a syndrome where the manager becomes like a security blanket a bit. And we feel that the belonging, the feeling of belonging, of being proud of being in a team can be viewed differently, I think. We can just be local and be close to home. I could work from home. I can go to a co-working space sponsored by Harmonie Mutuelle. I don't have to always be with my manager. So, of course, from the manager point of view, a lot of questions arise. How do I recruit? How do I create jobs? But it really challenges our capabilities to create jobs in deserted area. But I think if we create those jobs there, then we will really attract new talents. It's a bit off topic, I'm sorry, but it shows that management in a hybrid situation has to consider new questions. And we will see how it goes in 2 to 3 years. Going back to the topic and to how to manage in a hybrid environment. Well, first off, we're very lucky. This crisis enabled me to see how professional and stable managers were. Together, we've worked since 2016 on how to build trust. We worked on openness. We worked on how to include the employees, to how to empower them, and how to build trust. And I think during the crisis, these methods were all implemented, and the crisis just allowed us to make sure that things were working properly. And we're always trying to improve. Management is like a muscle. You need to do your exercises to keep it in form. And we also seized the opportunity of 2020 to rethink our company from a managerial point of view and from a location point of view. We created decentralized organizations and branches, and we rethought our model. So, of course, we thought about a new managerial model based on empowerment and subsidiarity and autonomy. We also thought about paying attention, and the crisis there has really highlighted some of the weaknesses we had. And, of course, co-responsibility as well. And we work on 3 directions. There are a lot of training possibilities, online or not, and we thought about this. How do I give tools to my employees? That was sort of the team training part of things. And I realized that our managers did not know what to do. What is hybrid power? What is hybrid, work? Do we all work at the same time? How do I synchronize my teams? So we give our managers tools, workshops to help them talked to their teams. We've done co-development, fast co-development to help them think about their own teams. And so the big question was how to help our managers in that situation. That was absolutely key. And the third direction was how to change the HR strategy as well. I'm very sorry, but HR sometimes forgets a bit about improving oneself. And how can I, as an HR, for example, improve the services I offer, better serve my employees? And it's fine to say that the employee should grow, the employee is responsible for its own growth, the manager is responsible for a team. It's a model that is very set, but I think HR should also think about how they can move the lines. Laurent, did you do anything new from a managerial point of view? Yes, and lots of things have been said already. You gave away a surprise. So it's true that collective responsibility, hybridization of working hours, and people working for some at the office and for others at home, all that were new responsibilities for managers. It were new challenges. And it was really hard for them. And we've been doing the same thing that Harmonie has, with a slight difference. We have an aspiration dimension, an inspiration dimension, sorry. We look at what's happening elsewhere, and we try to inspire people when they feel that, no, it's too hard, they're not going to make it. We do a lot of code development as well. We help each other, lots of support. We try to bring new solutions. And as for offices and workplaces, half of our employees are scattered around the country, and even in regions where, where it's less populated. And we're very lucky in that way, because we can offer proximity to our teams. Some employees can organize themselves, and once they agree within the team, they can either, go to the office or move to towns that are very popular right now, Bordeaux, Nantes, and so on, when others want to work at our office. And this brings them a lot of value and gives them joy at work. That's a very good transition with the third topic I wanted to talk about, the impact of hybrid work on workplaces. We've talked about company location and on the territory, but also how to organize the workplace itself, the office, how hybrid work can impact the office, the social interactions there are at the office. The question I want to ask is it something that is on your agenda? And have you done something already to change the workplaces? Fernanda, would you like to start? Thank you. So we're actually currently thinking about this. We have offices in Paris, and we're starting to think about, the workplace of the future. We have some beliefs here that were shared by my colleagues here. We think that the office should be a place where we come and gather to work together and to communicate together. We are a technology company where we need to innovate, so I think the office should be a place to meet, to foster innovation. We have employees who come sometimes with a headset, noise-cancelling headset, and they're always in a video conference, and it feels like it's no use to coming to the office for this. So we want to have people who enjoy being in the office, and our challenge is going to make the office a place where we can, yes, on the one hand focus, such as, if you want to study, to work, but also a place where you can communicate, exchange, and innovate. And not only with your team, but with the rest of the company. I think one of the weaknesses at the workplace today is that it's siloed, and people stay within their own department, within their own team. We also want the office to be a place for celebration when something is achieved and when we reach a milestone. And we also want the office to be a place of integration and information for employees. Thank you. Marie-Béatrice for Société Générale. Do you think about reorganizing the workplace? Well, it's something that we already thought about for the headquarters. At the headquarters, we transitioned to flex office, or we were trying to transition to flex office when the pandemic hit. And today what I see is that because of COVID, we're now questioning the flex office approach, and we're going even further in the way we're viewing the collective spaces. As Fernanda said, some people want to have spaces that are different from home but also meet their needs. And what are the needs? They need to be together in the office, but sometimes they also need to be alone, to be left alone, to focus. So we need to have different spaces to allow them to do all that. And we consulted with experts to achieve our transition to a flex office system. And what we decided is that we're going to multiply the spaces where teams can meet. We will save space, however, we will stop renting some of our offices, because it's also completely ridiculous to come in the office for 100 people when only 2 people come. So it's a waste of space, it's not good environmentally. So again, we're trying to give away our lease, so it's a 2 to 3 year plan. But we're definitely changing something in our company. And Caroline, for Harmonie Mutuelle, you're decentralizing. I guess that the workspace is also changing.
Yes, this is a question we also looked at in 2018. I don't really have anything else to add to what I said then, because the situation and the statements of the situation is quite similar. And what was quite nice is that we had this feeling that large open spaces were not necessarily the best places for people's health. And so the question is, what does the what's on the outside reflect what's on the inside? That was something that we were looking at quite closely. We had this belief that it probably wasn't ideal, but now we know it's not good for health reasons, physical health reasons, but also for mental health reasons. We've also dealt with another subject. So it's a complex subject. We have beliefs now. We've worked collaboratively. We work in different activities. We work on each site. I get the teams to really work hard, and we have to get them to work hard to respond and find answers to the questions you've just mentioned. You need to be able to put this into real life, into a real life application situation. So we're looking at everything to see how we can plan all of this and organize all of this and see how much, what it's going to cost and how difficult it's going to be. And the idea is to find the ideal answer. Open space office is not necessarily the best place for improving mental health. This is what the employees tell us, and I've looked at the figures. They need smaller spaces that are interchangeable to link to work as teams, but not necessarily within their own teams. They also need places where they feel private to concentrate and so on. We also need to be able to welcome people who don't have any place to work from home, who live in difficult situations at home. So there's full rejection of flexible offices, open space, flexible office. People reject it. People are really trying to, or voting for teleworking. It's quite a distinct sort of trend within Harmonie, our company. And what we're also experimenting with, and this is linked to the question of how you manage the square meterage or square footage. For teleworking, of course, it's an investment that's substantial, and especially when you're dealing with a lot of people, you have the question of empty space, but also the question of square footage. And we're experimenting in the Pays de Loire with other companies, on what we call a near-work dynamic, and to go even further to cross-match the community aspect and see how employees from these different companies who agree on a way of working can work in places that don't require a huge amount of privacy. So it's just an experimental operation for the moment. What about at KPMG? Is this something you have on your agenda? But it's quite a long-term project, actually, and subject. We've used, in the past, our idea accelerator, a sort of incubator system. Well, it was a sort of challenge-based approach. We have approximately 30 ideas that have popped up linked to these workspace and tools to bring ideas to the fore, and then we'll choose from these ideas. It's actually the employees who vote on these ideas. It's quite a traditional sort of incubator system, and then that's where we generate ideas, and then you incubate the projects with dedicated teams that are seconded, and then we work on various topics to draw inspiration for the future, because we don't yet or today have that much pressure in relation to our leases. That's an immediate pressure. So we do have time to think about it, and it enables us to have more time to experiment in relation to this new policy that we've put in place and that we need to, help along us a lot. And we will have more factual, observational elements and feedback, and get these dedicated teams to work on these projects to change the workspaces and the tools, because, of course, the connectivity tools, or connected tools, are very important to enhance the experience of the users. Sébastien, do you have anything to add about this topic before we move on to the other part? I've given a few responses to this. We have a sort of this very strict vision of how many teleworking days are going to be worked in the week. But I think this is very strange. I don't think we need to count the number of teleworking days, in number of days. It's all part of the collective bargaining agreements, that this is the number of days you can telework, and then there are add-ons to the contracts. But I think the situation is more complex. I think the dynamics are very different. We can start the morning with meetings that are in video conference, and then by phone, and then we go to the office at lunchtime, and then we work, then we go back early, and then you do half the day. You do half the day at work, half the day at home, and so by the end of the year, or even the end of the week, actually, how many teleworking days have you done at home and how many days have you worked from the office? Well, I think it's quite complex to set it in this way. I think that we need to think a little bit also about the link to teleworking, the relationship we have with it and how we quantify it, 2 days, 3 days. I know that it's a way of counting that is a bit complicated, but I think this is all part of the new developments that we need to think about, and new processes of thinking and ways of thinking we need to think about for people who are in a situation where they are working remotely. Teleworking sends back to the idea of working from your home. That's the basic idea behind it. And I think that actually we're in these hybrid systems that are far wider spanning. And in fact, you started talking about them. You talked about working at home or in a third-party place or like a co-working place or a building or an office building that's your main office building. Or you might even in services end up working at the customer's place. Or, of course, this leads to another idea of remote working. And you can fully understand that in the lockdown period that we've lived through, we've ended up in situations that are somewhat odd. We're working at the customers while still being at home. So you can imagine how that's organized from a management point of view in order to run all of this. These are just thoughts. And I think it's a long path that's ahead of, rolling out ahead of us. And we're thinking about the place of work as opposed to the home from which one can work. Béatrice. Now, what Sébastien was saying, I have 2 comments about what Sébastien just said. First of all, what people want is flexibility. That's obvious. Adapting, turn up at the office at lunchtime when you've had a meeting and so on. And that's a real need because real life is made up of, elements that you can't quantify or plan for. But when you listen to employees, you also hear that they want a plan, a routine. That means that they can manage their family life as well. For example, restrictions with or constraints with children. I was probably the first to have not thought of this, but people said to me, well, people want to know if it's every Thursday or so they like having a daily sort of or a weekly routine as well. And I think that you need to respond or meet this need. And the last element I don't have a response for, and I'd read a very good article that said, well, the environmental impact to lessen the environmental impact, it's best to have a full day of teleworking or a full work day at work and not come for half a day to the office every day. So I don't have an answer to give you, but it had sort of brought up warning bells in my mind. But maybe it's more complex than this. Maybe it's really the mixture of the requirements, flexibility, routine, or having a program. And then if you come by car, maybe it's better to come for the day or not at all. But anyway, it is an element that needs to be accounted for in the software. Now, that's what Sébastien was saying. This is Laurent. In our negotiation process, we had what we offered in KPMG is quite revolutionary. We were communicated on low presence, no control, no monitoring on a team scale, and so reference to a number of teleworking days per week, because it really depends on the activity with the client or not. You might be at the client's place 1 week more than another, because, of course, going to the clients is important. These are customers who, of course, pay our wages and so, bring in the money. So this is something that is important, and this is how these changes are very interesting. And I've lost a lot of sort of union chums in the negotiation process, because they were really stuck to this idea of number of working days, the add-on to the contract or not. So we're in something very flexible, something hybrid, that was based on collective and individual responsibilities. And we really believe in this. And so there's quite a long way to go to really make this all happen fully. But these are the main structures underlying our policy. Now, to conclude the last 10 minutes, we're going to move on to hybrid work and inequalities. and how these are linked. Marie-Béatrice, you're in charge, among other things, of the subject of gender equality within your mission or scope. Yes, I have a few comments to make about this. There is a small risk about increasing or deepening inequalities. And in the same way as Sébastien said this quite well, or rather well, people don't all have a place to live or family situation that means that you can telework in a smooth and even way from home. At Société Générale, in many cases that you've mentioned here, is optional. It's important, but not so it's not obligatory. But what is something else I wanted to underline is, and we talked about this, and we're just at the inception really of this, the fact that teleworking has led to a lot of inequalities, gender inequalities, for women mainly, and I'm interested in knowing whether it isn't detrimental too much to women. And someone who attracted my attention to this is a former unionist of renown and a remarkable woman called Nicole Nota, and she said, beware, teleworking, you've sent women back home with teleworking, and where she isn't wrong is that women aren't that good at managing networks and visibility, especially in management, and teleworking sends them back, or at least doesn't allow them to carry out in an optimum way these networks, or use them and run them. And I would be cautious about this and watch it. And same as everything else, apart from a few extreme situations, we need to be in a type of sort of balance, or a balanced situation, and a situation where we're monitoring things. And this is something that I'm looking at very closely, and I think we need to be very, very careful about this. Caroline, inequalities in the wider sense, do you have your opinion about, or do you have an opinion about this? I was just thinking about what our colleague just said. What I found obvious, or what was brought to my attention, was that all of this accelerated the process. We forgot that youth was having difficulties, that we were integrating them too late, that there were a lot of people in precarious situations, a lot of young people, and that there were students in precarious situations. I don't know if collectively in society and in the economy we were very good straight away in the first semester or the first half of 2020. I'm not sure we were great at managing things, but it did put things in the limelight, but it didn't resolve these problems of precarity among youth very quickly. And this led to a lot of questions for colleagues, for me and colleagues with disabilities, especially mental disabilities, or issues to do with social links, where social links are to be carried out in a slightly different way, and we haven't actually found the right solutions for this. And there are, of course, different situations, individual situations that are facilitated by teleworking, especially where people are, looking after someone or caring for someone, or the situations you've just looked at or talked about, or also situations of women who are subject to violence at home, domestic violence. I had this in mind, despite the desire or the injunctions to close all the sites and all of the agencies. Everything stayed open to enable, we have 70% of women, to enable women to come and have a breather, really, and even protect themselves from violence at home. And so I think that we still have a lot to look at, and I think that we don't really think enough about full teleworking, that it is something that masks and hides these realities, and there are issues to do with vulnerabilities as well. I've mentioned them. We have the situation of precarity in the home place or the place of living, which is also a subject that needs to be borne in mind when we talk about property policies and policies linked to the place of work. And so this is something that needs to be watched and followed over the longer term, inequalities. at work. Last topic, work and performance. This is a recurrent question, repetitive question. For some people, it's shown an increase of an improvement of individual performance with teleworking has improved this. And there are other questions about collective performance, capacity to innovate, whether this could be deteriorated over the long term with these massive teleworking situations in place. And some pieces of research have showed that there's an extra effect on collective working, on teamwork, with teamworks that work well when people all together can see that they can find that their performance in a hybrid system is even better. In reverse, situations that are having difficulties or that are currently in construction, moving on to a full or a lot of teleworking can deteriorate or even accentuate these difficulties. I know the question is very complex, and I know that, Fernanda, you're very interested in this question. So maybe you have an opinion about this. Well, I think that the question of performance, yes, but also over-performance, over-commitment. We're a company with a mission. We B Corp certified. Each colleague comes to OpenClassrooms because they want to make education available. And this question is something that we check. We try to check to see how we can support this performance because, of course, there are elements, fixed elements that are substantial and strong. There's strong growth. And how do we preserve employees from over-commitment? When do you stop? When do you take a breather? When you have performance and you've tasted performance and success and you're meeting very ambitious performance targets, when do you decide that it's just too much? And I think that we've set off a very strong discussion with our social partners also to try or to be able to protect our colleagues over time. Sébastien, what's your opinion about this subject of performance? Well, I think that there may be two aspects. There's the human dimension, and then there's the economic aspect as well. I think that there's a lot of research that says everything and the opposite of everything. And so overall, well, we need to draw conclusions from this. Either you bin everything or you read everything. And then you try to understand why we have everything and the reverse of everything. We have everything and the reverse of everything because it's a very complex subject. And I believe that teleworking and working remotely, hybrid working, is linked to company cultures or very specific organizations. And in the end, each of our companies is unique. They have their own background, history, culture, competencies, know-how, expertise, and history. And we don't all work in the same way. And I don't think we should try and think that we are able to model the economic performance or social performance as a whole by linking it to a way of reading it, because we've set up this teleworking system. And I think that we need to really take a step back from this. And when a piece of research says to you, it works, well, beware. And when a piece of research says it doesn't work, then you need to beware also. I'm just going to try now to give you an overview of or just an idea of what we have noticed in Orange. Now, in Orange, when we allow people to have activities during teleworking, the first feeling is that we feel that employees say that they have extracted themselves from a place that's not always that comfortable, and therefore their private productiveness improves. However, the reverse of this is that we've realized that when we've put our call centers on a remote working system, if time spent has improved, quality over time has actually decreased. Why? Because the organization structure for a call center, which means that when you don't have the answer, you put the client on hold, you go and see your manager, your supervisor, you go to see the quality manager or the person in charge of quality on site, and you say, I don't have an answer. Well, the colleague requires knowledge and responds to the client in real time. Try to do the same thing with a remote messaging tool such as Skype. or any other type. Try to call. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Visualizing and knowing which colleague you can appeal to get an answer means that you are not going to be able to give an answer response to the client. We've seen that over time, virtual call centers have a quality that has deteriorated. At the beginning, people were happy with them, and then in the end, what's happened is that things have deteriorated over time. Of course, it was in forced mode. Everyone managed it, and everyone has said, okay, we can do this, but we can't do it for a long period of time and sustainably. So it's interesting to see that in work communities there is this transfer of information, this type of sort of training that requires a physical presence and social interaction, and we can see this from our initial discussions. Now, other companies will have other experience and other experiments because I'll have put tools and collaborative means in place to ensure that there's no deterioration of performance. Then, of course, collective performance is in discussion. There are innovation processes that can be carried out remotely, and this, I'm sending you back to the 21st century now, when discussions, and even in the 19th century, communication was done in writing. People used to send letters to each other. We were very remote, and then science progressed, didn't it? And Poincaré sent to Albert Einstein and said, I found this unusual equation. It's called E equals MC2. And what do you think about it? MC squared. And what do you think about it? And that's the story. You know that you can see that there's a relationship, that this relationship is complex. Now, I want to come back to another topic that is to do with economic performance. It's not exactly the same as social performance of individuals as such, but it's more to do with the performance of communities, collective groups. I'll give you 3 examples from the United States. You always need to take this with a pinch of salt, of course, because the United States are not a reproducible model, but they can make you think of the way in which they think of teleworking. First of all, Microsoft did a big piece of research. They're the first seller of remote working solutions or interaction remoting with Teams. They did research on the employees and concluded that teleworking was deteriorating economic performance for their own company.
The study is quite interesting. You should read it. Of course, you have to be wary of studies. Sometimes it's biased, and depending on the context, but they have their own analysis saying that they could have all their employees working from home. So read this study, but beware. And it's an interesting study because it's from a digital stakeholder. And then we have the vision of telework that Apple and Google offered to their employees. Apple wanted all their employees to come back to the office after the pandemic, and the employees who did not agree to that. And the new Apple campus is located in a very deserted area. You have to take the highway through to San Francisco. There's lots of traffic. And so they had to negotiate with their employees to have locations and sites elsewhere so that people can go to the office in the best circumstances. So they have sort of campuses for their employees so that the commuting time is reduced, and so that people don't work from home. So again, the correlation between working at the office and how much time you commute is paramount. And Google said to their employees, you can work wherever you want in the US or in the world, but your wages will depend on where you are localized. So Google said in clearer words, and again, we're missing the context here, but and we need to be careful, but Google said to their employee, if you work in Missouri, your wage will be not increased because the cost of life is lesser. And then what it means as well is if you work in a foreign country where the quality of life and, the cost of life, is lower, then your wages will be lower too. I think it's interesting because it establishes a certain relationship between the company and the people who work from home. It says that working from is an option, but if you decide to go for that option, you might lose something in return because, you're gaining something in working in Greece, for example, because Greece is beautiful, but you will not be paid the same as your colleagues who are based in the US. So it's a different dynamic, and it opens a new range of questions about location and about the relationship to the place of work. So many employees in our group had secondary houses in the countryside or even in foreign countries. And the big question was, what do we do with these employees who work from home from, very far away? And people tell us, for example, that they're more performant when they work in the Mediterranean because the weather is nicer than in Brittany, for example. So all these notions are very complex. It's not just a question of performance. There's also a social, human, individual consideration here. And do you pay people depending on where they're located? And does it mean that you have sorts of an economic performance issue then? I think it's also part of the debate. It's definitely a topic we need to think about. Where will be telework located? It can be a few kilometers from the office, but it can be also thousands of kilometers from the office. With the means of communications we have today, we definitely can have remote workers in foreign countries. And we have the networks, we have the means to implement telework at a large scale. Thank you. I think this question could have its own debate, its own roundtable. We are right on time, so to conclude, I would like to ask the panelists, to give just one word that would summarize the issue around hybrid work. Marie-Béatrice, trust. Sébastien, revolution. Trust, says Fernanda. Great endeavor for the next generation. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for this panel and this debate. And now we are on a coffee break.